We had a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and a believer of Shimon on who wrote the last 8 psukim. Like, what do you mean, who wrote the last 8 psukim? Who wrote the first, whatever the other amount of psukim are in the Torah? So we know it's Torah's Moshe. So what's this? No one discussing who wrote Bereshis Bar Elokim or Eila told us Noach. Why should the last 8 psukim be any different than the first half of the Torah? So the reason is the last 8 psukim deal with the obituary of Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayamasha Moshe Eved Hashem. And it says Moshe died Eved Hashem. As we see, the biggest compliment to call someone is an Eved Hashem. Today we're into a Rav, Hagon, Hagadol, but the highest compliment to someone is saying you're an Eved Hashem. That's what the obituary said about Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Gemara says, so the question is, could Moshe write his own obituary? There are stories where people fake their own death, and they wanted to hear what the eulogies, what people would say about them. I don't think Moshe had that low self-esteem. I think he felt good about Ish Moshe Anav Miod. If he wrote that part, you should have known. But either way, so who wrote the last 8 psukim? So one opinion is Moshe wrote it. But how could Moshe write it? Another opinion is Yoshua wrote it. So if Yoshua wrote, we understand why Yoshua wrote it, because how could Moshe write about his own death? So how could you say Moshe wrote it? The last 8 psukim were written differently. Moshe, by the whole Torah, God said it to him, and then Moshe Omer Bakosi, Moshe then said it and wrote it down. Moshe wrote it down. But
why did you say it before you wrote it?
In fact, I don't think you had to, but that's Tosfos quote. That's the meaning among the Sofrim today. When you're writing a Sefer Torah, you say the pasuk first before you write it. I don't know if you had to. Maybe that's part of the nevuah, part of the yeah, but I guess it's a good idea anyway. Before you write something down, to say it over to make sure you're on the same page with your mind. A lot of times you're thinking one thing, writing another. So probably, I'm sure it's a pragmatic point of view, and plus in terms of like prophecy, and that plays a role. So either way, that's a machlokas who wrote the last 8 psukim. Because on one hand, how could you say Moshe wrote his own obituary, or but he wrote we'll have to see how the last 8 psukim are different. And the other opinion is Yoshua. So we assume, or the Rambam paskins, that we assume it was Moshe Rabbeinu who wrote the last 8 psukim. However, the last 8 psukim were written differently. Moshe Koseh B'dema. Moshe wrote them B'dema. So different opinions what B'dema means, but the simple pshat is Koseh B'dema. He wrote it with tears. B'dema, he was crying. And yet why? He was crying, as Rashi points out. Imagine, I guess some sugar and milk. So Moshe wrote the last 8 psukim Koseh B'dema. So what do you mean he wrote it? Because Moshe felt, even Moshe Rabbeinu realized the opportunity of doing mitzvahs in this world, was greater. Even he was crying because Moshe was one who used his great opportunity. In fact, they said the Vilna Gaon, he died Cholomite Sukkot. So when it came to Simchas Torah, the Talmidim of the Gra, they didn't want to dance on Simchas Torah. They said, it's too sad, our Rebbe's, the Vilna Gaon's not alive anymore. So, in fact, this is where the meaning of the song comes from. People, when they go around dancing, they sing, Olam Haba, a Gute Zach, learning Torah, a Besser Zach. Olam Haba is a good thing, but learning Torah is even better. So, the Rav Chaim Volozhin said, what are you sad about? The Vilna Gaon's in Olam Haba. But they said, yeah, but learning Torah is the best. He can't learn Torah anymore, at least not the same way before. And so Rav Chaim Volozhin, he had to think about it for a while, and I wasn't exactly clear on his answer. He said, but Olam Haba is still a good Izak. You're right, but you still could dance because he's still in a good place now. So Moshe Rabbeinu, mitoch star, is no more opportunities to do mitzvahs in this world, to learn Torah, so he wrote a B'dema. And so that's how some learn. You'll see the Vilna Gaon will have a different explanation. That's interesting. There's a lot of Vilna Gaon Torah on Sukkot, whether it's coincidental because that's the time when he passed away or not, but he died on Chol Hamoed Sukkot. So, don't mention the Blue Jays, whatever you do. But I'm still going to a Mets-Jays World Series. Yeah. So they point out that that's what Moshe Kosei B'dema, he wrote in tears. And he was crying because he wasn't have the ability to do mitzvahs anymore. Others point out that no, that's why the language is different. The Maharsha writes, it says by the rest of the Torah, Omer v'Kosev. Moshe said it over and then he wrote it. Like we said, like a Sofer does. But the last 8 psukim, it was only Kosev B'dema. There was no saying it over. So the Maharsha gives a halachic answer. He points out that there's a halacha in Hilchas Shabbos that for Kosev to be Mechalel Shabbos, to decimate Shabbos on the biblical level, it has to be Davar HaMiskayim. It has to be something that's lasting. You have to write 2 letters, but you have to write it on ink. And that's why some doctors in Israel, they have the Grumma pens where they disappear after, they're not, how long is considered Miskayim or not, it's a discussion, but that's why in the institutes in Israel set up pens where doctors can write. Obviously, if it's a life and death issue, you don't have to worry about it. You just write where you have to write. And that's a discussion. Also, today many of the nursing stuff is done on computers. So today they work out which maybe they can get it down to it's not a Davar HaMiskayim because how long will stay on the screen. So there's a whole discussion on that today in the postscript. But either way, the Maharsha points out that Moshe only wrote it. He didn't say it because he didn't want to say it because it would be mixed kashikra. Because Gemara never says he did lie. It just looks like a lie. So therefore, he didn't actually say it, and the writing's not considered halakhically writing. So that's how they explain Moshe Kosei B'dema. It was only like he wrote it with tears. It's kind of like at the beach. You write on the sand. You write whatever you write, or when it rains outside, the fog on your car. At least when we were kids, we used to write names or maybe other things on the cars. But that's not considered a ksiva. So therefore, that's what it means. Moshe Kosei B'dema. That's how some learn. The Vilna Gaon has a different shot. The Vilna Gaon says, "What do you mean? There's no machlokes, or maybe there is a machlokes. Ve'elu ve'elu divro kim chayim." They're both right. The famous, story when there's a Shalom Bayis issue, so they went to the Rav. So he hears the wife's story. So he said, you're right. Then the husband says his story. He says, you're right. So the wife said, how can we both be right? He said, you're right also. So sometimes everyone can be right. So how are they both right? Because the Vilna Gaon says that based on the Ramban in the beginning of his Hakdam in Bereshis, that the Torah is Shmos of Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Really, if we had the code, the whole Torah from Bereshis to Zos HaBracha, they're all Shemos, names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But so that's the Torah in its pristine state. We know the Torah was created before the world. So that's what and then we came along the way we have it today. We still in Bereshis, Baruch Kim, etc. But really, the Torah in its pristine state was the way it was. So the way the Vilna Gaon writes is Kosei B'dema. It's a mixture. They're really for the whole Torah. Basically, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the whole Torah in its pristine state, and he filled in up until the last 8 psukim. The last 8 psukim, Yoshua filled it in. How the way we read it today, Vayam Hashem Moshe Eved Hashem. But so therefore, Moshe wrote the whole Torah in its pristine form, but he couldn't write Vayam Hashem Moshe Eved Hashem, so he went ahead and Yoshua filled in the way. That's how the Gra learns B'dema, like by Truma, like things get mixed together. There's a mixture, so he learns that both Moshe and Yoshua, was a combination. So that's different opinions on who and how the last 8 psukim were written. But however, even if it's Moshe Rabbeinu who wrote them, there's a special halacha regarding the last 8 psukim we don't find by Kol HaTorah Kulo. That's what the Gemara says, Yachid Korei Osam. That it says, what does that mean? That a Yachid Korei Osam. So there are many different explanations what that means, Yachid Korei Osam. So somewhere in Yachid, they only can read it once. That the Rashi writes, this is why we have a principle, Emas Sikim Bekolos, that when you're reading the Tochacha, you can't break up the Tochacha. Like normally we have on Shabbos, we have many different aliyahs, and we call up and make Hosafas. They make Hosafas, and therefore we always, that's what the Mishnah says. On Shabbos, everyone agrees you can have Hosafas, so therefore we had aliyahs. He says, but when it comes to the Tochacha, you can't break up the Tochacha because either it's inappropriate, God's giving you a rebuke and you're putting him on pause, or we don't want to add extra brachas. The Gemara gives different reasons. So that's what he writes here. For the last 8 psukim, you can't break them. You want to make a lot of money on Chas and Torah, so you want to sell Chas and Torah. So that's actually some Rishonim say Emas Sik and you can't break it up. Other Rishonim say you can't read it over. You can't sell it twice and make it. But there's a famous explanation from Rav Selevan that he says, why the last 8 psukim Yachid Koreosam? Like what's the pshat? So he learns Yachid literally. He says the last 8 psukim you don't need a minyan. For the whole Torah, if you're home or if you're not sure, you could read the Chumash, but you don't read with the brachas on the Sefer Torah. The Rambam writes that the last 8 psukim, Yachid Koreosam, means no minyan. So the Rabbi goes crazy on the Rambam. He says, Ech ha-minyan halach. Where did the minyan go? I guess he didn't realize it was Simchas Torah and they roll out into Kiddush. But where did the minyan go? That's the question the Rabbi asked on the Rambam. What happened? Because you're reading Ma'ona, you're reading from the end, all of a sudden the last 8 psukim, and everyone disappears. So that's Rav Soloveitchik explained that Kriyas Torah, the whole Kriyas Torah we have all year round, is set up. It's a Zeichel L'man Torah, like the Ramban writes. We have a mitzvah every day not to forget the Torah was given at Har Sinai. So it's Zeichel Kabbalas HaTorah Har Sinai, and that's why, in fact, the Ramah quotes the minute some have that they stand up for the whole Kriyas Torah all year round. Not the Baruch L'Sacham Avorak, the Dovrak Kedusha. That you might have to stand. That might be Me'ikar Adin, but during Laini, one is permitted to sit, but the Ramah quotes a minute for the Maram Nuremberg to stand during Kriyas HaTorah, because the Jews were apparently standing at Har Sinai, and therefore it was Zeichel L'man Torah, so therefore we stand for Kriyas HaTorah. So they point out, so the Rav Soloveitchik point out that's true, by Kriyas HaTorah all year round. That's why we have they explained it. It explains the difference Tam Elyon and Tam Tachton by the way we read on the Yontiv of Shavuos, that how come the Rambam Shita was that we stand. The Rambam doesn't mention anything about standing during Kriyas HaTorah, because he hasn't mentioned anything about Tam Elyon. He read the Kriyas HaTorah the same way. In fact, according to some, they say, it's heresy. You're giving more credence to the Aseres HaDibros than you are to the rest of the Torah. So Rav Soloveitchik explained as follows: says the whole Torah was, so we're reading Kriyas HaTorah, Zeichel Kabbalas HaTorah. He says, by the whole Torah, how did it happen? Moshe Rabbeinu, in public, went ahead and taught the Torah. He went ahead, he brought Klal Yisrael all together, and he started teaching them Torah. It was a miraculous way that his voice carried. That's why we don't get the mitzvah Birkas HaTorah until right before the Jews enter Eretz Yisrael, because they were learning in a supernatural way. That Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching everyone Torah. And so what happened, except for the last 8 psukim, Moshe wasn't going to make a big announcement about Vayam Hashem Moshe. So the last 8 psukim, he went ahead to individuals and started teaching them privately. He went to different, private groups. So that's the Rav Soloveitchik. So that's the pshat in the Rambam, that the whole Kriyas HaTorah is Zeichel to the way it was given. How Moshe Rabbeinu gave it throughout the time the Jews were in the Midbar. So by Kol HaTorah we gave it Barabim. Hence the Chiyuv Kriyas HaTorah, we need to do it B'tzibur, we need a minyan. But the last 8 psukim, he went ahead into individuals privately, so therefore he didn't have a minyan, so we don't need a minyan. That's the pshat in the Rambam, Yachid Koreosam. So those are the different pshat. Either Yachid individual reads, a Yachid can only be read once. It can't be a bimafsik, or as Tosfos quotes, the old minhag, it was that when the person who got called up for the aliyah used to lane. That was the original practice, but not to embarrass people who couldn't lane, so we have a Baal Koreh. So it says Yachid Koreh, so we go back for the last 8 psukim, we go back to the original institution that the one who gets called up a chassan Torah lanes. That was our minute in Ohev Tzedek this year, since the Baal Korei didn't show up. I was laning, so therefore we fulfilled the Yachid Korosam according to the Bali Tosis. So to summarize, we had a machlokes, Rav Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, who wrote the last 8 psukim. Was it Yoshua wrote the last 8 psukim because it talks about Moshe's obituary? Well, you had to say, no, Moshe did it. If Moshe did it, so how was it different? Either Kosei B'dema, he wrote it with tears because he was in Tsar, he was going to die, and therefore it wasn't a Davar HaBiskayim, or like the Gra says, Elu Le'elu. Moshe wrote the whole Torah in a pristine form, like the Ramban writes, but Yoshua finished it off. And then so what's so special about the last 8 psukim? So Yachid Korosam, either you can't break it up, you can't read it twice. The Yachid, the Rav gets the Aliyah, or the Baal Korei, the one who gets called up, does everything for the last 8 psukim. Whereas Rav Selevan pointed out in the Rambam, Yachid Korei Osam, that means that you don't need a minyan. Not that you can't have a minyan, but you don't, because anyway, that we pass anyway. If you start a Davar Kedusha with 10 and you still have 6 people, you can continue anyway. But Yachid Korei Osam is the individual Kohen, because that's the way it was done, Zeichel Kabbalah Satorah.